The cult of Volodymyr Zelenskyy really doesn't seem to extend past mainstream news, political elites, and Hollywood. And don't get me wrong, that's a pretty powerful group. But do they really believe in him? Or is Zelenskyy just a smokescreen? I'm investigative journalist Ben Swann, and in this third episode of our 12-part series, Zelenskyy Unmasked, we're investigating how the deep state and international monopolies are the ones really running things in Ukraine.
Ukraine is a United States proxy war. If you go back to 2014, just to go to recent history, we set the stage for what's happening in Ukraine right now. And even before that, with the eastern expansion of NATO, the United States of America promised that we wouldn't expand east with NATO, and we've done it over and over and over again. And so we've kind of set the stage. I'm not excusing Russia. I'm not blaming Ukraine. I'm just saying that there is more to it than just Russia invading Ukraine.
Who's really running Ukraine? Could it be the global financial elites who are the biggest directors of this drama? They appear to be the ones who have been telling Zelenskyy what to do, as well as most other Ukrainian presidents since the dissolution of the Soviet Union. Or take the big business of international lending as an example. Since the war began, the IMF agreed to lend over $15 billion to Ukraine, the first time they ever issued a loan to a country at war. And it doesn't stop there. The financial behemoth has put together a plan to facilitate a projected $64 billion in loans over the next few years. As the world's largest investment company, which manages over $8 trillion in assets, BlackRock has had a hand in virtually everything, including a 15% share in Fox News. Now, here's something you probably didn't know. President Zelenskyy recently inked a deal with BlackRock, which will effectively hand post-war Ukraine's economy over to the financial behemoth.
Some of the groups that are going into Ukraine and they're cutting deals to take advantage of the Ukrainian national capital.
BlackRock will be running the Ukraine Development Fund, which aims to pump as much as $750 billion into Ukraine after the war. The long list of individuals who use their political positions to get rich off of Ukraine is reportedly headlined by none other than President Joe Biden and his son, Hunter Biden. The Congressional Oversight Committee documents that despite having no relevant experience, Hunter Biden was paid up to $1 million a year to serve on Burisma's board from 2014 to 2019.
And basically, Hunter Biden was offered to make $60,000, $80,000 a month just to be on the board of directors. In Ukraine, the average salary before the war was $500, $1,000 a month. And a teacher would get $200 a month. And this guy comes in, drug addict, just because he's the son of the Vice President of the United States, he brings in the cash and he brings in the connections.
Ukraine's Prosecutor General, Viktor Shokin, was investigating corruption within Burisma until then Vice President Joe Biden stepped in.
They were walking out to press conference and said, no, I said, we're not going to give you the $1 billion. They said, you have no authority. You're not the president. The president said, I said, call him. I said, I'm leaving in 6 hours. If the prosecutor's not fired, you're not getting the money. Well, son of a bitch. Got fired.
Now, President Biden has since claimed that he got Shokin fired because he wasn't doing enough to combat corruption. Entries on Wikipedia, and you know how unreliable that site is, claims that Biden's firing of Shokin to protect himself and his son Hunter, it's just a conspiracy theory. This line is supported by mainstream news outlets like CNN and USA Today. But evidence presented in a U.S. Senate committee investigation claims that Shokin's dismissal was related to the Biden family's corruption schemes. The committee alleges that Shokin was fighting corruption in Ukraine and his scrutiny endangered Burisma. Shokin himself recently made public declarations stating that Biden had him ousted from office because he was hot on his trail.
Видимо, господину Байдену доложили, что мы подходим к тому моменту, что начнутся допросы его сына и остальных лиц, Арчера, ну и других лиц, которые причастны к этой ситуации по делу Бурисма. И они понимали, прекрасно понимали, что это может закончиться довольно для них плачевно.
Accusations of the Biden shady dealings are not just limited to payouts and favors, though. There are also questions of the Biden family's connections to biolabs in Ukraine. When he was a Burisma executive and his father was vice president, Hunter Biden's company, Rosemont Seneca, invested $500,000 into a San Francisco-based pathogen research company called Metabiota. I was actually one of the first reporters in the country to tell this story back in 2021. Hunter Biden introduced Metabiota to Burisma officials to negotiate the establishment of biolabs in Ukraine. During this time, Metabiota also received $24 million in funding from the Department of Defense, which included money for Ukrainian research projects. Although the U.S. government and its cheerleaders in the media screamed that the existence of U.S. biolabs in Ukraine were a Russian fabrication and conspiracy theories, the Pentagon and other U.S. government officials later admitted to the fact that 46 peaceful Ukrainian laboratories exist in the country.
There are indisputably biolabs in Ukraine that were financed by the United States. In fact, Victoria Nuland herself, Victoria Nuland being the Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs at the State Department, she revealed in sworn Senate testimony when she was answering a question from Marco Rubio.
Ukraine has biological research facilities, which, in fact, we are now quite concerned Russian troops, Russian forces may be seeking to gain control of.
Now, if you're creating like a cure for cancer at some biolab, you're not worried that if some opposing army captures it, it's going to inflict this cure for cancer on your troops. Now, are you? You only care if what you're dealing with is extremely dangerous and deliberately designed as a weapon.
This cast of war hawks, neocons, and neoliberals within the Biden administration, though, doesn't stop with Victoria Nuland. There's also Biden's Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, and his Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin. Being of Ukrainian descent, Blinken has taken a great interest in Ukraine and its conflict with Russia, and has crafted the Obama and Biden administration's policies towards these countries. But Blinken has some obvious conflicts of interest. He co-founded West Exec Advisors, a private firm with ties to the defense industry. Blinken was also a partner in West Exec's sister company, Pine Island Capital Partners, which invests in the U.S. defense industry. Blinken says that he left the company before taking the role of Biden's Secretary of State. Blinken's partner at Pine Island Capital, though, was Lloyd Austin, Joe Biden's Secretary of Defense. Austin was also a board member of the military contractor Raytheon Technologies, where it's estimated that he held anywhere from $800,000 to $1.75 million in investments.
One thing that I did recognize spending all those years with my colleagues, particularly on Capitol Hill, is that they live in an absolute bubble. We're one step away from winning in Afghanistan, winning in Iraq, winning in etc. And if you look at the witness list, there was no one there, no one provided to give the alternative perspective. And this is true under Republicans and under Democrats. They simply don't listen to anyone with any different view. And when they fail, they're promoted.
Aside from international bankers and U.S. military contractors, who else stands to gain from Ukraine? Well, there are, of course, the oligarchs. As we saw in the last episode, Zelenskyy was practically created by Igor Kolomoisky, one of Ukraine's richest men and an accused gangster/banker.
He backed him for the presidency. Keep in mind that when Zelenskyy ran for the presidency of Ukraine, he could speak no Ukrainian. He only spoke Russian because that's the only language that he'd ever been exposed to. So he was picked to do this.
But Zelenskyy's oligarch connections don't stop with Kolomoisky. There's also the case of Viktor Pinchuk, perhaps the richest person in Ukraine. Zelenskyy regularly speaks at Pinchuk's Yes Forum, and Pinchuk has been one of Zelenskyy's most important supporters. Pinchuk was a mere millionaire when he married Ukrainian President Leonid Kuchma's daughter in 1997. This arrangement, coupled with Kuchma's vast privatization drive, quickly turned the millionaire into a billionaire and one of the country's most powerful people. He's known for rubbing shoulders with global elites, and he keeps them happy. Pinchuk donated a whopping $8.6 million to the Clinton Foundation during the time that Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State. He also donated £320,000 to Tony Blair's Faith Foundation, and he's a major donor for NATO's think tank, the Atlantic Council, where he also sits on its International Advisory Board. One could argue that it's figures like Pinchuk, in collaboration with the US and NATO, that started all of this back in 2014.
А решали те олигархи, которые наняли
What so many Americans just don't know is that the Ukraine war didn't start with Russia's invasion in February of 2022, but 8 years before, with a coup staged with the diplomatic and economic support of the United States government. Ukraine's democratically elected president, Viktor Yanukovych, was a thorn in the U.S.'s side because of his refusal to take money from the IMF and instead lean toward Russia for financial stability.
But think about the audacity of a high-ranking U.S. State Department official and many U.S. senators back in 2014 being involved in the overthrow of an elected government in Ukraine and calling it a democratic revolution. I mean, if the shoe were on the other foot and you had Russian or Chinese senior-ranking political military officers coming to the United States and openly campaigning for a candidate or other, it would shock the U.S. to its core.
And there's little evidence to suggest that these foreign interests, the United States included, want what's best for ordinary Ukrainians.
It is a monumental strategic objective that is just now beginning to emerge from the fog. Now, I've seen it and I've talked about it now for the last couple of years. This idea that the ultimate goal was the dismantlement of Russia and using global oligarchs, I call them the boys from Davos, they are beginning to think, you know what, if we could somehow dismantle Russia with their phenomenal natural resources, why, my gosh, instead of being a multi-billionaire, I'll be a trillionaire.
You know, it's the I'll botch the quote from Sun Tzu, but you set the world ablaze to rule over the ashes. It seems that's what NATO's doing.
Well, sadly, that is true of neocon and neoliberal policies in the Middle East that have destroyed countries in Iraq and Syria, in Libya and Yemen. Now they're doing it in Ukraine. And if those who are running Ukraine or are the most powerful in that country have no regard for whether they leave the nation and its people in ashes, what does that mean for Ukrainians who will become collateral damage? In our next episode, we're going to take a look at who's really responsible for one of the highest stakes terror attacks since 9/11 in what might be one of the most bungled acts of war in history. And be sure to watch all of our episodes at truthinmedia.com and on X at truth_in_media. We'll be back next week as we continue to leave Zelenskyy unmasked.